I never expected a Thanksgiving dinner to expose a secret my entire family had been hiding from me for years. I walked into my grandmother's house thinking I was just there for another uncomfortable family gathering. But within minutes, she stood up in front of everyone and shouted, "Why is an elderly couple living in the $1 million vacation home I bought for you?" I froze. I looked around the room, confused, because I had no idea what she was talking about. The truth was, I wasn't living in a luxury home. I was struggling to survive. I was homeless. And then the lawyer arrived. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought a single Thanksgiving dinner would completely change the way I saw my family forever. Growing up, Thanksgiving was always the one day of the year when everyone came together. No matter how busy life became, my grandmother insisted that the entire family sit around the same table, eat the same recipes, and pretend for a few hours that nothing was wrong. To everyone outside our family, we looked perfect. We were the kind of family people admired from a distance. My grandmother, Evelyn, was respected in our community. She was strong, successful, and known for making smart decisions. She had built a comfortable life for herself and always reminded everyone that family mattered more than anything. But inside our family, things were more complicated. My relationship with my grandmother had never been simple. She loved me, I knew that, but she also had very high expectations. She believed people should always be prepared, responsible, and successful. Sometimes it felt like she measured love through achievements. That Thanksgiving, I arrived at her house expecting the usual family gathering. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. The dining room was decorated with the same golden candles she used every year. My cousins were laughing, my aunts were preparing dishes, and my grandmother was walking around making sure everything was exactly how she wanted. But something felt different. I noticed people looking at me strangely. Conversations would suddenly stop when I entered the room. My grandmother kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to say something. I ignored it at first. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Then, halfway through dinner, my grandmother suddenly placed her fork down. The entire table went quiet. She looked directly at me and said, "Emily, I want you to explain something to everyone." I felt my stomach tighten. She continued, "Why is an elderly couple living in the $1 million vacation home I bought for you?" For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. $1 million vacation home? Bought for me? I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh, and tell me this was some kind of misunderstanding. Nobody laughed. Everyone was staring at me, and the only thing I could say was the truth. I have no idea what you're talking about." The moment those words left my mouth, I could feel the entire room change. "I have no idea what you're talking about." It sounded almost ridiculous even to me. $1 million vacation home? A property connected to my name? Something my grandmother supposedly bought for me? But the truth was simple. I was not wealthy. I was not hiding some secret fortune. I was not the kind of person who could casually own a luxury property and forget about it. At 28 years old, I was working hard, paying my bills, and trying to build a stable life for myself. I had a normal apartment, a normal job, and normal financial responsibilities. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but I was nowhere close to owning $1 million home. That was why my grandmother's accusation felt impossible. But instead of believing me, some members of my family started exchanging looks. My cousin Jessica leaned toward her husband and whispered something I couldn't hear. My aunt crossed her arms and looked at me with disappointment, as if I had already admitted to something. That hurt more than I expected, because these were the people who knew me. They knew I had spent years working for everything I had. They knew I was not someone who chased money or tried to impress people. Yet in that moment, everyone seemed ready to believe the worst. My grandmother reached toward a folder sitting beside her chair. "I'm not making this up, Emily," she said. "Your name is on the documents." My heart started beating faster. Documents? What documents? I looked at the papers in her hand, but from where I was sitting, I couldn't see anything clearly. My mind started racing through every possibility. Had someone used my information? Had there been some mistake? Was my grandmother confusing me with someone else? Then she said something that made the room even quieter. The elderly couple living there has been staying in that house for months, and they believe they have permission from you. I felt completely lost. Permission from me? I had never spoken to any elderly couple about a house. I had never signed anything. I had never even visited the property. I'm telling you the truth, I said. I don't know anything about this. For the first time that evening, my grandmother's angry expression softened slightly. But before she could respond, my uncle interrupted. Maybe we should wait until the lawyer gets here. The lawyer. That word immediately changed the atmosphere, because everyone at that table knew something I didn't. And as I sat there surrounded by my own family, I realized the hardest part was not being accused. The hardest part was knowing there was a secret about my own life that everyone else already understood except me. For the next 20 minutes, nobody at the table seemed interested in eating anymore. The Thanksgiving meal that had started with laughter and family stories had turned into something completely different. The food was getting cold, the candles were burning lower, and everyone's attention was focused on the front door. Waiting for answers that I was somehow supposed to already know. I kept looking at my grandmother, hoping she would finally explain everything. But she stayed quiet, holding that folder tightly in her hands. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty on her face. Then the doorbell rang. The entire room froze. My grandmother stood up slowly and walked toward the entrance. A few seconds later, she returned with a man wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "This is Mr. Harrison," she said. "He's the family attorney." My heart sank. I had never met him before, but the serious expression on his face told me this was not a simple misunderstanding. He sat down at the table, placed his briefcase beside him, and looked around at everyone. Then his eyes stopped on me. "Emily," he said calmly, "before I explain anything, I need you to understand something. You have done nothing wrong." Those words should have made me feel better. Instead, they made me even more nervous. Because if I had done nothing wrong, why did I feel like I was on trial? Mr. Harrison opened the folder and carefully removed several documents. "These papers concern a property purchased 5 years ago," he explained. "A vacation home located on the coast. The property was placed under a special agreement, and Emily Carter was listed as the future beneficiary." I stared at him. Future beneficiary? I looked at my grandmother. She avoided my eyes. The lawyer continued, explaining that the home was never meant to be a personal gift for me to enjoy immediately. It was part of a long-term arrangement created for a very specific purpose. Then came the detail that shocked everyone. The elderly couple living in the home is there because of a promise made years ago. A promise? I felt completely confused. I had spent the entire evening being accused of knowing about something I had never heard of. Mr. Harrison turned another page and said, "The reason your name appears on these documents is because your grandmother wanted you to eventually take responsibility for the property." I could barely process his words. But then he paused, and the next thing he revealed changed everything. "However, Emily, there is something your grandmother never told you about why this property exists in the first place." The entire room went silent again, and for the first time that night I realized the house was never the real secret. I sat there staring at the documents in front of me, trying to understand how an entire chapter of my life could exist without me knowing anything about it. For years, I believed I understood my family. I knew my grandmother was strict. I knew she valued responsibility and reputation. I knew she had built a successful life through years of hard work. But I never imagined she was carrying a secret that involved my future. Mr. Harrison placed the papers back on the table and looked at me carefully. "Emily, this property was not purchased because your grandmother wanted to give you a luxury vacation home. It was created because of something that happened many years ago." I felt everyone's attention shift toward my grandmother. She looked down, and that was when I realized this was not just about a house. This was about a story that had been hidden from me. My grandmother finally spoke. "When you were younger, you probably thought I was too hard on you," she said quietly. I almost laughed. Too hard? That was an understatement. But I stayed silent. She continued explaining that years ago, before I was old enough to understand, our family went through a difficult period. My grandmother had a close friend named Margaret and her husband, Thomas. They had supported our family during a time when everything could have fallen apart. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They were simply two kind people who helped when nobody else did. Years later, when my grandmother became successful, she wanted to repay that kindness. The vacation home was never about showing off money. It was about keeping a promise. Margaret and Thomas had spent their retirement helping others, but they had nowhere permanent to live after losing their own home during a difficult financial situation. My grandmother purchased the property so they would always have a safe place to stay. But why was my name connected to it? That was the part one still didn't understand. Mr. Harrison explained that my grandmother had chosen me because she believed I had something rare. Compassion. He told me she had watched me quietly help people my entire childhood. She remembered how I would give away my own things to classmates who needed them, and how I always noticed when someone was struggling. Hearing that shocked me, because growing up, I never felt like my grandmother saw those parts of me. I only remembered feeling like I was never good enough. My grandmother wiped away a tear. "I thought protecting your future meant making decisions for you," she admitted. And suddenly, the anger I had felt began mixing with something else. Confusion. Because the person who had hurt me through silence was also the person who had secretly tried to protect me. The house was never the gift. The house was a responsibility. And the biggest secret was that my grandmother had been preparing me for a future I never knew existed. After the lawyer finished explaining everything, the room slowly became quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Before, I had felt attacked. I felt like everyone was waiting for me to admit something I didn't do. I felt embarrassed, confused, and honestly a little betrayed. Now, I knew the truth about the house, but I still had questions. And one question mattered more than anything else. Why had nobody told me? After dinner, I asked my grandmother if we could talk privately. We walked into the living room, where old family photos covered the walls. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, and moments that were supposed to represent love and happiness. I looked at those pictures and wondered how many secrets existed behind those smiles. "Grandma," I said, "why didn't you tell me any of this?" She sat down slowly. For the first time that night, she did not look angry or confident. She looked tired. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. Those words hurt because I had heard them before. People often said they were protecting me when they were actually making decisions without considering how I felt. I told her that finding out this way was painful. I told her that standing in front of my entire family, while everyone questioned me, was humiliating. I felt like a stranger at my own family's table, I said. My grandmother lowered her eyes. And then she admitted something I never expected. She had been afraid. Not of me. Of losing control. She explained that she had always believed planning everything was the best way to keep the family safe. She thought if she handled every detail, nobody would get hurt. But she never realized that keeping secrets could hurt too. She apologized for assuming I would not understand. She apologized for making choices about my life without including me. And most importantly, she apologized for accusing me before asking me the truth. That was the part one needed to hear. Because the property was never what damaged our relationship. The lack of trust was. For years, I thought my grandmother only saw my mistakes and weaknesses. I thought she only noticed what I failed to achieve. But sitting there, I realized something complicated. Sometimes people can love you and still hurt you. Sometimes their intentions can be good, but their actions can still leave scars. I did not forgive her instantly. Healing does not happen because someone says sorry once. But for the first time, we were finally having an honest conversation. And that was something my family had avoided for years. The days after Thanksgiving gave me time to think about everything I had learned. For years, I had believed my family's biggest problems came from the things they said and the things they did. But now I understood that sometimes the hardest wounds come from the things people choose not to say. The vacation home was never about money. It was never about luxury. It was about kindness, responsibility, and a promise my grandmother wanted to keep. A few weeks later, I decided to visit the property for the first time. When I arrived, I expected to feel angry or uncomfortable. Instead, I felt something I did not expect. Peace. The house was beautiful, but not because of its size or value. It was beautiful because of what it represented. I met Margaret and Thomas, the elderly couple who had been living there. They welcomed me like they already knew me. Margaret smiled and said, "Your grandmother always told us you had a good heart." Hearing that almost made me emotional, because for so long, I wondered if my grandmother truly understood me. But maybe she did. Maybe she just had a terrible way of showing it. Thomas explained how my grandmother had kept her promise for years. She never wanted recognition. She never wanted people to know what she had done. She simply wanted them to have a safe place to call home. That changed the way I looked at everything. When I returned to my family, the conversations were different. My relatives apologized for judging me before knowing the truth. My grandmother apologized again, but this time, I could see that she truly understood why I was hurt. I decided not to focus on the anger anymore. I could not change the way everything happened, but I could choose what happened next. I chose to accept the responsibility connected to the property. Not because I wanted the house, not because of the money, but because I finally understood the meaning behind it. That Thanksgiving taught me something important. Family is not about never making mistakes. It is about having the courage to admit them, learn from them, and choose to do better. Looking back now, I realize that Thanksgiving was never really about the vacation home. It was about everything that happened before that moment. It was about years of misunderstandings, unspoken feelings, and family members believing they knew what was best without actually having the conversation. That night, I walked into my grandmother's house thinking I was being accused of something I did not do. I left understanding something much bigger. The truth is, families are complicated. People can love you and still make mistakes. They can have good intentions and still hurt you. And sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who need to learn how to listen the most. My grandmother's mistake was not creating the secret. Her mistake was keeping me outside of it. And my mistake was believing that silence always meant someone did not care. That Thanksgiving changed the way I looked at my family forever. I learned that asking questions is better than making assumptions. I learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And I learned that sometimes the most valuable things we inherit are not houses, money, or possessions. Sometimes, they are the lessons that help us become better people. Because in the end, the biggest gift my grandmother gave me was not a vacation home. It was the chance to finally understand the truth.